May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. About a week and a half ago, I was in Anaheim at the National Association of Episcopal Schools conference. And we had the opportunity to listen to a really interesting speaker. She was a child psychiatrist. And she was telling us a story about one of her clients. It was their first meeting, and she was just trying to get to know him a little bit. So she said to him, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he says, "A VC." And we're like, "What's a VC?" Well, apparently if you live in Marin County, you know that a VC is a venture capitalist. And she said to him, "Well, how do you think you're going to get to be a venture capitalist?" He said, "Well, after high school, I'm going to go to Stanford and I'm going to major in business. And then I'm going to get an internship at Goldman Sachs. And after that, I'm going to Harvard Business School. And then I'll work for Bain and Company. And then I'm going to get a few of my friends together and we're going to start our own company. And we'll be venture capitalists." She said, "Wow, that's quite a plan." And he said, "Well, I've got it. I know exactly what's going to happen." The most remarkable thing is this was an 8-year-old boy. And he knew at 8 exactly how his life was going to go. And her point was that there are very few of us, when we're 8 or 10 or 12 or maybe 35, know that our life is going to go from point A to point B in an absolutely straight and perfect line. And she asked us, there were about 650 of us at breakfast, how many of you have had your life go in a, you knew, absolute straight line to where you are today? And there were very few timid hands that sort of went up in the room. And she said usually 1 to 2% maybe of people. But for most of the rest of us, our journey from point A to point B sort of does this. You know, and it loops back, and then you get pushed over to the side, and then you sort of go on a straight line for a while, and then you hit a detour and you go somewhere else. And I suspect if we spent a few minutes talking with each other, we would discover that very few of us have had our lives go from point A to point B. Some of us had no idea we were even headed for point B when we started at point A. And for the folks who were listening to Mark in this morning's gospel lesson, what was really important to them, though, was getting to point B. And they were really focused on that straight line. They were experiencing a time when keep your eye on the prize was sort of the motto. Whenever we hear this type of apocalyptic literature, one of the things that we can assume is that the communities were going through a time of real tribulation and turmoil. A time when they were persecuted and oppressed. A time when out there looked so much better than in here. That the best that they could do was really imagine what the future was going to be. Because the present was just too hard to be living in. They had that keep your eye on the prize mentality. And that was the community that Mark was writing to at this point. Because he was writing probably in that time in the middle of the Jewish-Roman War, and everything was in complete upheaval. So of course, the thing he wanted to say to the people is, I know now is really hard, but I need you to look to the future. I need you to wait for the next coming, because the future will be so much better than the present. Thankfully, I think most of us don't live in there most of the time. Most of us sort of are on that journey. We're not moving from point A to point B in an absolutely straight line most of the time. And what is important to us as modern people, since we're really not waiting for the world to end anytime in the next few months, what's important is now. What's important is the baby steps that we take. What's important is what we choose to do today, not just looking at what's going to happen tomorrow. Because I think sometimes we get very overwhelmed with these great big things going on. I mean, just this week in the news with Ferguson, you're like, how can I make a change there? This seems like such a big problem. What can I do? And I think what this lesson teaches us is that it's not always our job to fix the great big problems. It's our job to look right where we are. It's our job to make a difference here, today. It's a job to make a difference in our families or in our schools or in the places that we work. It's our job to be on that journey, to be taking those steps, and to be knowing that we are on the path that God desires for us. That the journey is rarely a straight line, but that is part of its beauty. Because so often when we're on the journey, we hit a detour and we think, now what's going to happen? And I don't know what's going to happen. And maybe you meet your spouse. Or you hit a detour and you're really unnerved and maybe you get offered a new job. We don't know what's going to happen in those moments. We don't know what's going to happen as we're on the journey. And Mark gives us 3 instructions for taking that journey this morning in the gospel lesson. Mark says, beware, keep alert, and keep awake. Mark's basically saying, pay attention to what's happening around you. Now, his audience was watching for Armageddon, for what's going to happen, wars and famine and pestilence and so forth and so on. But Mark's message to us, I think, is keep awake, beware, pay attention to the journey. Watch for the ways that you can be invited into new places. Watch for the ways where God is speaking to you. Continue on that journey and pay attention to what's going on. Right now, I think we're about to enter one of these seasons of the year where point A to point B, we're all over that, because point B is what? It's Christmas! If we can just get to Christmas, if I can just get my house decorated and all those lights up and all that food bought and all the presents bought and wrapped and hidden, and if I can just get everything just perfectly right, it will be so good. Yeah, maybe. The thing is, there's all this time between now and then. This thing that we in the church call Advent. The blue and the Advent wreath. The reminder to slow down and step back. The reminder, those beautiful reminders. I love the Advent wreath. It's that sense of journey from 1 candle to 2 candles to 3 candles to 4. And you can't rush it. You can't light 3 candles this week. That would just be wrong because it's the first week of Advent. The church reminds us to be on the journey, to take the step back. And like we do in Lent, there's things to help us do that. There's some booklets out in the narthex for meditations through Advent. There's Advent wreath making materials in the hall if anybody wants to make an Advent wreath. And the monks at the Society of St. John the Evangelist are doing this really cool thing. Some of you might subscribe to Brother, Can You Give Me a Word? And you get their emails every day. But for Advent, they're doing that and they're adding an image along with the word. So today's word is look. And there's this lovely image that goes along with it. And what they're inviting us to do is to take some time in reflection and meditation with that Advent, with that image. And then if you see an image that resonates with you, take a picture and upload it to Instagram or Twitter. I have to figure out Instagram, but I think I can probably do that. And what they're doing is gathering all these images and putting together a huge Advent calendar of images from people across the country and really across the world that are now all connected on their Advent journey through these images and they all get shared. It's one of those ways that the church invites us into the journey, reminds us to be taking one step at a time, perhaps allowing ourselves to get detoured in ways that we wouldn't expect or imagine. Mark's community was so focused on the future. They had to live a straight line because they didn't know how much longer they were going to survive. We're lucky. We have the opportunity not to walk that straight line. We have the opportunity to walk this lovely path laid out before us. A time to prepare, a time to get ready, a time to simply be on the journey. Amen.